welcome, Northreach. So this is session 2, episode 2 of the Bylaws and Admin Manual Review Q&A panel. The name keeps getting longer and longer, but hopefully the process is getting clearer and clearer. That's the goal. So this evening we've set up sort of a framework. Welcome, Northreach. So this is session.
Yeah, I may want to mute that.
That's the goal. I'm not sure where that's coming from. So this evening we've not coming from me. Sort of a framework. Anybody not muted? But I was muted and I don't even have the YouTube open.
I'm muted, so I don't know.
All right, so technical interesting anomalies. And I don't even have the YouTube open. And it continues. Okay, I'm going to see if we can move on and if maybe it's working. So we had set aside quite a bit more time for actual questions. Technical, interesting anomalies. And it seems to be continuing. So and it continues. How about we go offline, try to resolve the situation, and meet back. Okay, I'm going to see if we can move on. Working? Okay, we're going to try this again, hopefully without the strange, bizarro echoing. So hopefully everything's going good here, and you're all able to connect up without any issues. And please address any questions that you have to the live chat in the YouTube window. So hopefully everything's going good here, and you're all able to connect up without any issues. And clearly, it's still a problem. You have to the live chat in.
All right, so I closed my window. Is anybody still hearing the feedback? Hello? Anybody?
I don't hear anything.
Okay, it may have been my window. Shelby?
Yes. I've closed all of my browsers. I have nothing open. Nothing.
Okay. I just closed mine and it seemed to have stopped, so that narrows it down.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I don't know what the issue was.
I don't know. It was weird. Okay. Now it feels better. Yay, learning curves. Okay, so as I was starting to say previously, we wanted to set aside a lot more time for actual questions and discussion through this session. So for those of you who are able to join us or to watch the recording from last time's panel, we spent a lot of time talking about just the history of sort of how we came to be at this point where we are reviewing the documents and sort of the general goal of where we want, what we need to do to get us to that point of having our documents in line for our 501c3 application. So there's been a little bit less discussion on Facebook and the forums in the last week, and maybe that's because people are waiting for more opportunity to ask their questions during this panel, and maybe it's because people are getting answers to the questions that they had and have less to discuss about it. Either way, we want as a group to make sure that we're available to answer any questions that still may come up. So please feel free to, if you have questions that are outside of sort of the planned scope of this panel, feel free to jump into the live chat in the YouTube link and ask away. We want to be providing information that is most useful to our membership. So outside of questions, specific questions that get posed to us, the plan for this evening is to discuss two articles in the bylaws, and that is Article 2, membership, and Article 3, officers and directors, and two sections of the admin manual, Section 2, membership, and Section 4, officers. We'll mainly be holding the topics of discussion to membership and officers and not necessarily be diving into directors unless there is interest expressed in that sort of vein of communication. So let's start off with the bylaws and talk about Article 2, membership. So for those of you who are maybe reading along, there's a couple sections, right? We talk about qualifications for membership. We talk about classes of membership. We talk about non-discrimination, voting rights, and terminating membership. Oh, and regional assignment of membership. So there's quite a few sections within that article. And would anybody like to talk about sort of similarities to what we currently have in place, or any changes that have been discussed, or any questions that may have been brought to your attention?
I know that Ravenstone happens to be like the question people during this, but they were wondering what exactly a member application would actually entail, if there would be a background check, what exactly that actually goes through for that application, since we're actually going to be doing member application processes now.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's mentioned in Section 1 is complete and sign the membership application, but we haven't tackled the sort of task of creating that membership application. But I know it's something that the Corpora Review Committee had chatted about, and also something that the Council of Crowns had chatted about too. Is there anybody who'd like to speak to that specifically?
Sure, I can. So one of the issues that we run into, especially when we start getting into being a functional, non-charitable organization that the IRS is looking into, we have to have some sort of threshold for membership, i.e., when does somebody actually become an official member of our organization? Previously in AMCARD, that's been haphazardly fulfilled by the waiver. But that doesn't really work, because everyone that plays at AMCARD needs a waiver, whether they're actually a member of the organization or not. So if somebody from, I don't know, Rising Winds comes to visit and wants to play, they have to sign a waiver, but they're not a member. So we need something that shows, yes, this person wanted to be a member. Yes, we accepted them as a member. The application can literally just be that. It can say, I would like to be a member. Here's my full legal name. I'm of appropriate age, etc., and then somebody verifies that and says, okay, approved as a member, and that it can be that simple. The Corpora Committee didn't feel it was necessarily our role to create the actual application, because we were just trying to draft the framework for the bylaws, so we didn't do that. We felt that was more something that the members could pitch in on, and they could figure out. I mean, they could have background checks in it theoretically, but the purpose of the membership application is to have a threshold for membership, to say at this point, this person took this action, requested to be a member, the membership was approved. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, one of the things to sort of add on to that is, I believe and I have to look into this again, but when I've looked into this previously, you have to submit a list of your members for certain portions of the nonprofit paperwork. And I honestly don't remember if that was State of Alaska filing or if it was the 501c3 application.
That was for the charitable nonprofit, not charitable nonprofit, so charitable gaming license.
Okay, that's what it was. I knew there was something that we were looking into that required a membership list. And while we have a list of players who participate, that's not necessarily a clearly defined list of members. And so you could say, you could take the track of saying, well, you're only a member if you've paid dues. But we have tons of people who don't pay dues, but are active members of our organization. And that would be sort of removing them from a group that they rightly belong to. dues is a nice trigger, right? Like this person gave money, we know when they gave money, we know who they are, and so we could build our membership list based off of that. But that seems unnecessarily exclusive, and we would want it to be more inclusive. Just because you didn't pay $10 doesn't mean you're not a member. And so then the question was, okay, well, what other trigger point can we have to say, okay, this person's a member? So there are some requirements where they want a list of members, and we don't have a clearly defined list of members. And I guess that's, one of the other things as we discuss this, like what kinds of things do we want to capture in a membership application? And from my standpoint, just a name, legal name, right? So we know who you are, that we verified against an ID, so you can't sign somebody else up for membership when they didn't sign up for that. And then the statement that you want to be a member of the organization. Like it could be that basic. It could have some additional information if we wanted. When you get into the area of background checks, you have to be careful about the potential liability that you're incurring. If you do a cursory background check, you have, you've said, we've checked this person out and they are safe to be in our organization. And if your background check wasn't thorough enough, you didn't do your due diligence, and then that person, isn't safe to be in your organization, now your background check process has potentially opened you up to liability of you should have known better, you didn't do your job well enough. And really good background checks are really expensive. And what's the purpose of that background check? I mean, what are we trying to accomplish with it? I don't think that it's ever been envisioned that the membership application is designed to eliminate people from being able to be a member. It's just designed to have a clear trigger point of you are a member. So that it removes that ambiguity from your status. And that's I know that's been a topic that's come up for sure. And yeah, as we move forward, what we may find that we need to do is we need to have that conversation very concretely. And we need to, before we can vote on this, it'll have to have all of the appendices actually drafted up and completed. Can't vote on the document without all of it. So that's something that we'll have to have discussions on. What should that include, and what is the purpose, or what information do we need to get from it? Oh, that's not my camera. So are there any other people who had, heard things around their park or specific questions or any highlights that they wanted to touch on throughout the process as it relates to membership in the bylaws?
One thing to keep in mind too, because again, there's some folks that express some concern, and I don't know if people are just afraid of background checks or what's happening. But if, as an organization, we were going to conduct background checks or do any sort of process like that, we would need to spell that process out. I mean, there would need to be something in our admin manual or bylaws that say these are the kinds of background checks we would conduct, and this is the process by which we will conduct them. Those aren't there because the organization at this point in time, to my knowledge, has no intention of doing that. So that's something else you can point out to people that express that concern, is that we're not pursuing any procedure for doing that sort of thing at this point in time. We just want to know when we requested to be a member. I think the hard line we have right now is we'll leave that to the membership. If the membership votes that that's what they want to do, and that's as a separate issue from this corpora, then as an organization we would do that. I haven't heard anybody express that that's something that they feel strongly we should be doing right now. So at this point, it wasn't in the corpora because we don't really have anyone that thinks it's that important.
So there's been, sort of anecdotal conversations, right, about perhaps looking through court view for any sort of embezzlement issues for people who are going to be prime minister, right? Like we should maybe do a little due diligence and make sure that this person hasn't stolen a bunch of money from another organization before we give them access to our money. Like there are some potential issue or potential solutions moving forward for that. That's probably a good practice to have. In other organizations, nonprofit organizations that I have worked with, been on the board with, and been president of, we definitely implemented some very cursory background checks for people who had access to the organization's funds, and they were specifically targeted towards financial issues. That organization also was expanding into allowing members under the age of 18 to join, and they had a lot of conversation about what types of background checks were appropriate now that they were having minors involved in their organization. There's some good guidelines out there that are already available for organizations that participate with minors, which of course we do. And there's definitely some good guidelines out there. It's not something that we have started to dive into or even been given direction by the membership that that's an important area for us to go to. But as Goran said, if the membership is on board with that, or if there's legal counsel that says you guys are putting yourself at unnecessary risk by not taking these steps, then it would be something I think we should talk about it for sure. But there's two sides to it, right? Like one, if you start doing it and you do it wrong, then you have a lot of liability. And if you have bad processes in place, like there's a whole host of education that has to go along with that, because you can do background checks wrong in a way that they don't actually help your organization. And I'm not a professional in that area. And there are people who are professionals in that area, and we would need to do quite a bit of learning before we just sort of rode off into the sunset with an idea that we thought was a good way to go. So that's sort of, covered a lot in the sort of qualifications for membership. That's section 1 of Article 2. As we just sort of move around here, unless other people have additional questions that have come up, if we look at section 2 of Article 2, it's classes of members, where we talk about regular members, associate members, and visitors and attendees. Does anybody want to chat about any of these areas here?
I can point out that there's really only one change from our current procedure in here, and that is requiring that under regular members, which before I guess would be called dues paid members, is that you have to meet the attendance requirements to be a regular member. And that affects some different sections later on, such as all things. One of the things that we were hoping to shore up is the ability for people who aren't regularly attending members to just show up at an all thing and vote on something. It could be pretty critical and then disappear back into the woodwork. Essentially, you just have to meet the same threshold to vote in anything.
So from an administrative standpoint right now, if you have ever tried to figure out voter eligibility for an election or an all thing, it is an administrative nightmare. There's like a bunch of different criteria for voting in different things. There's different criteria for voting in your local all thing as opposed to the principality-wide all thing, as opposed to voting for your local officers, as opposed to voting for your local guild masters. And so there's a spreadsheet that we designed specifically that prime ministers can go through to figure out who can vote for what. And that's a little crazy. So part of this sort of, as we get into the administrative manual, that gets streamlined a lot. This is sort of where it starts by defining the attendance requirements. So the next section is section 3. It's non-discrimination. This is new or expanded? Can't remember.
I'm pretty sure it is the same, or at least substantially the same.
Okay, I did have a suggestion from someone. So we have in here, you know, we don't discriminate on the basis of race, color, national origin, religion, gender identity, age, physical or mental disability, marital status, changes in marital status, pregnancy or parenthood, status as a veteran or veteran with a disability. So we have a lot of things that are covered in there. And someone did say that, you know, it'd be worth discussing adding sexual orientation in there, which maybe was the intention that we would cover with gender or gender identity, but those are different things. So that might be something good to include in there. And there was also some discussion over the inclusion of pregnancy or parenthood, because we don't have a principality-wide sort of policy on how we handle pregnant players taking the field. And there was some question as to if a park doesn't allow you to play because you're pregnant, is that discrimination? I don't know if anybody else had.
Well, yeah, there's a couple things to keep in mind there. Discrimination, I mean, discrimination is literally just treating somebody differently for one reason or another. That's not necessarily a bad thing. There's legal and illegal discrimination. So, like, say, in hiring practices, it's illegal to discriminate to hire somebody based on their gender. Unless you're, like, say, hiring a police officer and they need more men or they need more females. At that point, that's legal discrimination. If somebody comes out and, let's use disability as an example, and they have a disability that prevents them from, say, jugging, that would be an acceptable form of discrimination to say there's no way that we can safely accommodate your disability and allow you to jug in a manner that doesn't present a risk to the other members. So unfortunately, we can't allow you to do that. That's a reasonable and legal form of discrimination. With the issues with pregnancy, that may be something that we want to, I don't know, get like actual medical feedback on. But the idea is that it's not appropriate to put the rest of our members in a situation where they might harm, say, an unborn baby through, through physical contact, such as AMPGuard, such as, like, I'll use myself for an example. If somebody's, in their 3rd trimester, they're 8 months pregnant, and I turn around and stab them with a pole arm before I realize that that was the pregnant lady on the field, I'm going to feel really bad if something bad happens. And I'm going to be fairly upset that the organization put me into a position where that might have, that might occur. And I think that it would be reasonable for the organization to say, you know what, at this point, it's probably not safe for you to go out there. And, and that would, to me, seems like a reasonable time to say no. However, after someone's been pregnant for 2 weeks, I don't know that there's a risk there. So that might be something to research and take on a case-by-case basis. But this section right here in non-discrimination is basically that we won't say, because you're pregnant or not pregnant, we're not going to let you be a member or vote or run for office or, the other actual parts of the organization that being a member would let you do.
I actually did want to address the question that Rose Death brought up in the chat, and that is, what are some other combat sports' views on that?
And
So it's
yeah,
not really a
I'd
matter of,
actually like to weigh in on this. I have a sister-in-law who works for a clinic that deals with pregnancy. She works for a birthing clinic. And there are some girls that may not know that they're pregnant. In that case, the liability isn't going to be on our association if there's negligence in regards to the fact that they are or not pregnant. But if they do step onto the battlefield knowing that they are pregnant, I mean, some of our guys hit hard. They hit harder in the lower 48. These are things that you have to consider being a mother as well. I mean, taking the responsibility to not even step on the field would be great. I mean, if you're pregnant and you want to run for office, that's different. You can have somebody fight for you in the tournaments. That's fine. But I wouldn't want, say if I got pregnant, I wouldn't step on the battlefield, period, end of discussion, because I wouldn't want to put my child in that kind of risk.
so it's not really about a matter of discrimination. It's a matter of safety.
That's a matter of safety.
It is discrimination, but it's legal discrimination because there's a business
Yes.
reason for doing so.
Basically, the clause is for membership and such, not for getting on the battlefield.
Right.
Yep.
you got it.
Right. The person can do everything else, and we're happy to support them in doing everything else. Just don't get anybody hurt.
And most importantly, don't get yourself hurt either.
All good things. So yeah, there was some, some questioning that I had heard about that. So I'm glad we had an opportunity to discuss this and give a lot of good feedback. And I think it's a great question of what do other full contact sports do? How do they handle this? And that's probably a good topic of sort of research that we do that and maybe bring forth like here are how some other organizations handle it. And we're not really out of the norm at all. I think we handle it in a pretty typical manner for any full contact sport.
And just for historical purposes, the precedent for the last 15 years that I played Amcard Alaska is if you're pregnant, you don't play. That's just what's happened with every single pregnancy that I've ever been aware of.
And
I think
speaking from 20 years of the SCA, I can tell you that anybody in the SCA would not step on the battlefield if they were pregnant, and their association a lot like ours. As a matter of fact, they hit a lot harder. So
yeah, I think that pretty universally everybody's had that experience, and I think that's a good threshold and tradition for us to uphold. And it was just good to note that the non-discrimination policy does not really affect that. Your membership is still, you will not be discriminated in your membership at all. So section 4 was regional assignment of membership. It's a pretty short section. It's just got a couple little sentences there. And for sure. Yeah, definitely. And I know some other full contact sports that handle it that way, where you can participate if a doctor has cleared you for participation in that. Mainly what that does is that transfers the liability onto the doctor if something bad happens, because you say, well, this medical professional said it was okay for me to hit this person that hard, therefore I am not legally liable. However, there's a whole host of other things that go along with harming someone that have nothing to do with legal liability. So, but yeah, Jordan, if you have additional questions on that, definitely, I think it's a good topic of discussion. So back to section 4, the regional assignment of membership. Did anybody had heard any questions or wanted to make any comments on that?
Yeah, actually, we had a couple of questions being out in Ravenstone because we have a lot of our members. We have at least, I want to say, 4 or 5 members that are from Eagle River, and they go to Ravenstone specifically and not Loop and Moon. Would this change under the new regional stuff that would be coming out?
No. So the and this is sort of one of those cross topics where most of it's spelled out in the admin manual, but it starts in the bylaws. But the way it's spelled out in these 2 documents is when somebody applies for membership, they're assigned to a region based on their geographical location, at which point they can just simply request that the Northreach Prime Minister assign them to a different region.
So much like school, they do a zone exemption.
Right. I mean, it's just like, hey, you're in Anchorage, so you default to Loop and Moon, but if you want to play out in Ravenstone, you just let us know and we make that change. Like it's just a default is all it is.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there are definitely plenty of situations where I live somewhere, but I play somewhere else because I can't ever make it to, the games that are on that day. I work every single day. So I've that my local park meets. So, but I want to play Amp bad enough that I'm willing to drive an hour, to do that. You're definitely going to be able to just transfer over that way. Yeah. And again, none of these things are designed to stifle people's participation. It's a lot of it, like this particularly, is designed to streamline the administrative processes because they get a little out of hand sometimes. So section 5 was voting rights, and I don't think there was one thing that changed in here, and I think that was the election vote shall be taken by written ballot either in person or electronically via email. And so the whole concept of proxy voting has basically been in this has been proposed to be removed. And does anybody want to speak to that? I'd be happy to, but
well, being out in the Palmer-Matsu area, we have a couple players that occasionally, due to weather or car problems or stuff like that, are unable to make it to the actual game during the voting time, and this would drastically impact some of our crown quals and some of our voting stuff that we do for all things, as well as Principality all things. So taking away the proxy voting would be slightly detrimental to at least Ravenstone for its regional issues that it has.
So
and they want to know how we can fix that.
So currently, proxy votes for all things are not allowed. There's no provision for that in the current corpora. So right now, you're not allowed to do that. And just so everybody knows, a proxy vote is when you basically write your ballot out by hand, put it in an envelope, and then give it to somebody else to deliver physically. There are very few members that don't have access to electronic communications. So emailing in a ballot, and this is for elections only. This wouldn't apply to all things. Election votes can be done that way, and that gives a very clear chain of custody. It's very difficult to fraud. You have to hack somebody's email account, essentially. And so it gives the Prime Minister the ability to track all of those very easily, rather than trying to deliver it by hand.
Yeah, I actually think that it allows for more people to participate. I mean, we have the ability that you can deliver your vote electronically via email to the Prime Minister in charge of that election right now. Very few people take advantage of it, but it is there. So the difficulty with proxy voting is that I can be at the election, and I can see that so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so are not in attendance, but I know how they were going to vote. So I write their vote down, I put it in an envelope, and I hand it to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has no idea where those ballots originated from. There's no traceability in that situation. And whereas if that same person who is not in attendance that day wants to participate in that vote, they can send an email, which the Prime Minister can verify where it came from. And you know, honestly, if somebody's gone to the trouble of hacking somebody else's email, they probably have way bigger issues than who they're voting for in the election, anyways. But it gives a clearer traceability that we're not opening ourselves up to fraudulent activity.
Yeah, and I think in the digital age that really there's no excuse for handing in a paper ballot at this point. So
Yeah, no, that's true. And also, I totally want the email Hadelin the Conqueror. That sounds awesome. You should open that up for me. You should like start that account. Yeah, that's a good point, and that could totally be something that's on your membership application. What email do you want to use for official Northreach business? Boom.
Well, don't we also have the opportunity of recording emails on the org system?
You definitely do. And the Prime Minister has access to see which email address is you've registered through your org account. So that would be another great place to do that, that we can accept your digital vote as long as it comes from the email that you've utilized through your org account. That takes some education, right? Because how many people actually know what email address they have associated with their org account? Very few people, I can tell you. But that's some education that would be worth going through because there's some other good benefits from knowing the email that's associated with your org account, like being able to change your own password and things like that. So yeah, that's another good point.
And I just want to throw out too, in case people are curious why we don't allow, or why we're proposing to not allow electronic votes for all things, is historically all things have always been conducted in a town hall fashion, in which there are lots of discussions that happen, and people's votes, the whole nature of the topic can change from the beginning of that conversation to the end, and people that are voting without being able to participate in that are essentially voting blind. And so essentially the way all things are conducted now, and the reason we're not proposing that we add electronic voting to it, is to maintain that process.
So if there's no further discussion on that, section 16 is, well, section 6, I'm way jumping the gun, of Article 2 is terminating membership. And that is the last section of this article. Yay. So anybody want to touch on highlighted changes, additions, anything new here?
Well, we added that you're no longer a member after you die.
You would think that's common sense, but that's probably...
No, let's see. The difference here, we actually upped the threshold of requirement for terminating somebody's membership without an all-thing vote to be a board vote, rather than, say, the agreement of the Principality Monarch and Prime Minister, which would be just 2 people. Now it's going to require 4 to do that. And so that's kind of an up. So I don't know if people consider that a good or bad thing, but that's different. Other than that, it's all pretty much the same. That's a great question, and I've got an answer for you. Because we're an organization that engages in our constitutional right of association, which means that if we as a group decide that we don't want to hang out with you, we don't have to justify that. Nobody can force us to hang out with you. And so the reason that's in there is so that it's very clearly stated in our bylaws that if our members don't want you to be a member, that's all the cause that we need. in reality, there's going to be other things that go along with that, but essentially that lets us kick you out for just being a dick all the time. If enough members say that you're, the way you interact with everybody makes them not want to interact with you, then that's all they need. And that's an important thing to understand. You don't have to break a law. You don't need to punch somebody in the face. You don't have to steal money before we're justified in removing your membership. If enough of the officers or the board or whatever agree, then that agreement is all that it takes. Right. Essentially, the without cause part allows our membership to terminate your membership. And when you ask why, they just say, "Cause."
Well, it's also, if you continue to read on, it says maybe with or without cause after the affirmative vote of at least two-thirds of the directors, if such suspension or expulsion would be in the best interests of the corporation. So it's not even so much just like you're a dick and we don't like you, but you're a dick and you're driving members away and you are harming the organization. Like, I mean,
yeah, it covers more of the intangible things. Like there wasn't a specific law that was broken, or
Adeline secretly wants to up her band count before she steps down.
no, I have no desire for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and essentially, and to answer Jared's question, with cause means that we can point to a specific part of the bylaws or actual state statutes or federal regulations and say, you violated this, therefore you're out. Without cause means that there's something that sort of maybe falls in between those things that we still consider to be detrimental to the organization. And it makes it so that we don't have to spell out every little thing that you could possibly do. That would be with cause. It would be where we point to an actual line item. So unless we want to have like this giant monstrous section that comes up with every creative thing we could think of, this covers that.
So kind of put it into like a job perspective. You have a job policy. Following that job policy or breaking that job policy, you're going to get a write-up and possibly fired. But at the same flip side of it, if you had a customer and you were a dick to that customer, you wouldn't be really breaking a policy, but you would still be getting discipline or even fired depending on your actions.
Well, when you get fired and you ask why and your boss says it's just not working out, that's what this is.
And the other thing to remember in this is that, so it's not two people saying, we just don't like this guy, so he has to go, right? It's 2/3 of all the directors. And in the proposal, the directors are basically your Council of Crowns plus the Northreach Prime Minister and the ex officio. So it's the group of leaders that we have all as members said, we trust you to be making decisions on our behalf, to be leading us in the direction that we have given you. And these people have gotten together and said, this person is a detriment to our corporation. They are harming our organization. And they have to make that decision by 2/3 vote. So it's not just like a couple people, it's the majority of our leaders.
5 people scattered across the entire state.
Right. So if you've done anything in AmpGuard, you know that it's difficult to get, sort of consensus. And it's even more difficult to get consensus on just because we don't like that person. Like there's a good reason for it. And the appeal has not been removed. So if there is sort of public outcry of like, leaders, you've made the wrong decision, this is not okay, the membership, as always, has the ability to reverse that.
So can you go through what the process would look like, kind of from the start? Like, say, for example, a local park is having issues with a particular player, and not necessarily like the big, they haven't like traveled a lot, or maybe they're reasonably new. Like, what does the like whole process look like, in terms of like getting that person out?
For suspending them or removing their membership?
Yeah. Or both. I mean, do they happen in that order? Like, do you typically, like at the local park, do we have a means, like, without having to go to the board of directors to suspend somebody?
Yes, I believe that's spelled out in the admin manual. And I think the way we have it set right now is that it's the principality monarch that's able to make the temporary suspension. Although I don't know if that's, honestly, I can't remember off the top of my head if that was left off of the regional executive officers on accident. I think the intent was still for them to be able to do a temporary suspension. So, but either way, the way the process would work is player A does something inappropriate. Either the local regional or local monarch or the principality monarch recognize that that was inappropriate, and they temporarily suspend that person's membership. Then at the next board meeting, that item would be reviewed, and the board can make that a permanent suspension. And then once the person's been suspended permanently, then that person has the option of convincing 20% of the dues paid membership to support them by signing a petition, at which point the item would automatically go on the next all thing. And if the membership votes to reinstate that person's membership, they have the ability to overturn the board's decision.
And sort of another step in there is once the temporary suspension has been enacted and it's awaiting board review, then the board reviews that situation. I mean, that's the board's job, is to look at that situation and determine the action that was taken, is that appropriate action? Should this be held up as a long-term action? Or is there another way we could have handled this situation and that membership membership doesn't need to be terminated or suspended? I mean, the board has to do their due diligence there. All of the monarchs would be getting together to say, wow, how is this being a detriment to our organization? And let's get some really clear facts instead of, yeah, that guy's a jerk, I don't like him. I mean, like, hopefully all of our elected our leadership doesn't, they take their job seriously enough that they put the time and effort into actually understanding the events that transpired that led to that initial decision. And that's where, the responsibility is on the leadership to act responsibly.
And also, if when it comes to the board, like, so if I was Principality Monarch and I suspended your membership, that suspension expires at the board meeting. The board has to decide whether or not to extend it or to not extend it, but they're like, that's the end of it right there. So if the board doesn't support the suspension beyond what's already happened, then it stops. So I guess as soon as the board meeting was over, I could suspend you again, but that's probably going to cause a whole lot of headache for your prince or princess.
Does the player who is potentially being suspended, like, are they going to be able to be present at that board meeting where that's being discussed to make their case?
Our board meetings are open to the public.
Although we typically request that before you jump in and like waylay the agenda, that if you want to be part of the agenda, that you request to be added, to have some time to speak so that we can plan accordingly. But they are open to the public, so.
And I can't imagine the board being like, well, we know you're here and we know we're talking about suspending you, but we don't want to hear anything you have to say.
Right.
That'd be a pretty good basis for getting that petition signed, I would think.
Yep.
I just want to read Gurdon's response here. He says, fair enough, I understand the reasoning. I'm just concerned about everyone getting due process when getting banned, and that the wording doesn't just give a blank check to kick out whoever. And so I think we have pretty much talked about that. Obviously, it's in AmpGuard's best interest to keep people So obviously we would like hopefully not be kicking people out just because we disagree with them or whatever.
So to clarify, would this just be a ban that's affected to their park, or is this all principality wide regardless of how short the ban is?
Yeah, so the important thing to remember is that we are one organization, and if your membership is suspended, that means you're no longer a member of Northreach until that suspension is lifted.
Right.
All right.
Yeah, it's
Follow-up question. Follow-up question. Now, if somebody has been permanently banned, would they have to seek like a petition from 20% of the total Northreach voting members, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Yeah, no, and that's a good question. The other thing to remember too is that the board can overturn that suspension in the future. So if somebody was permanently banned and came back a year later with a completely different board, they can plead their case to them, and that board could overturn it.
good discussion in this area, for sure. It's not something that happens very often, but when the topic comes up, it's good to know what the rules are and what the process is.
Better have and not need process.
Yes, definitely. So that sort of wraps us up to the end of the membership section of the bylaws, and it's 8:56. So there was a little bit more discussion in this than I had anticipated that there would be, but it's good discussion. We did have a little bit of a rocky start, so we didn't have a full hour to field questions and discuss. But I think it's also really important that we don't drag these meetings out past the promised hour. So I'm going to cap our discussion here in an effort to let everybody get on with their lives. I appreciate everybody taking the time out of their evening to show up and participate. Everyone of the panelists, thank you very much. Everyone who attended through the live stream and was participating and asking questions, that helps us to have a much better idea of where we're going with everything. Make sure that we are answering concerns and questions of the membership. We're capturing this information so that we can utilize this to make our process better and to be in alignment with what our membership is looking for. So thank you very much, everyone, for your time. And we will do this again next Sunday, where maybe we'll make more progress, but maybe we'll just have a lot of really good discussion. Thank you, everyone.
It's a win-win situation.
Right? It is. Have a great evening.